Yeah, hello again, everyone. It's a pleasure to present Greenfjord on behalf of many. You can tell from the title, Greenfjord stands for a Greenlandic fjord ecosystem in a changing climate, sociocultural and environmental interactions. So I'm really just standing here on behalf of a large team. So we're a leadership team of 7. And so I believe some of us are here. For example, Andreas Fieli, who is leading the cryosphere cluster. Feel free to raise your hand or not if you want to. Sam Jacquard is also in the room, I think, and Lisa is also around. So if you have questions, feel free to reach out to any of us. And so we have 6 different clusters that address this large topic, right? So we need the cryosphere, we need the atmosphere, we need the ocean, we need the land, but then we also have 2 encompassing clusters that look at the biodiversity in all of the environmental compartments, and also the human dimension that is, of course, linked to all of them. And we have an advisory board that's international, including from Greenland, and our team is growing. At the moment, we're around 40 scientists, a third of them early career scientists. There's many institutions included, and we're growing more and more international as well. This gives you a little bit of an idea of where we are based. So you see in the Greenland map where we are, so it's the southern part, and then you see in the zoomed map, the large one, that we have picked 2 different fjord systems. So one with a glacier that terminates in the water. So that is this one. And there, the hypothesis is that due to the meltwater and the calving from the glacier, you insert different dynamics in the fjord that allow nutrients to be dispersed more easily. So there should be more productivity in the fjords with the marine terminating glaciers. And we contrast that with a fjord system at the bottom, where we only have a land terminating glacier. So that means the meltwater only flows on the top, and then you get a stratified situation. And according to the theory, you would have less primary productivity. And so we chose these 2 fjord systems so that we can answer our overarching question, which is what are the consequences of the retreating ice in the fjord ecosystems? And so the retreating ice means land terminating glaciers, and we can somehow look into the future with that. And what we're interested in with all these different clusters are then the marine productivity, as just explained, but also the carbon cycle. What does that mean for local weather patterns, climate evolution, and the livelihood of the people? All right, and so the project runs for 4 years. We started last year. The first season was a little bit of scouting, so we know the place where we're going. And this year and next year are actually the intensive observation periods. So we spent a lot of time in the field this year. So I put here around 1,000-person days in the field. So many people for quite some time this year. And then in 2025, we plan to phase out and hopefully also find some funding so we can actually continue and don't need to phase out. Now I'm going to go through what all of the clusters did since we started. And of course, it's not a lot of data and discussion of the results. It's more a little bit showing, giving you a flavor of what we've done in general. So starting with the human cluster, they conducted a series of interviews and also documented walks. So people can walk with the scientists to tell them how they perceive the landscape, what it means to them. And they also work with audiovisual material. You see on the bottom a photograph where the locals present their photography on the region, so we can see the region through the eyes of the local residents. The land cluster was there a couple of times this year, earlier in the spring, May, June, to look at transport of sediments, so erosion. So that's a darker picture on the left side, and on the right side, this is what they've done in the summer with collaborators from ETH, so looking at soil chronosequences, so how does soil evolve over the course of time, so closer to a glacier and further away. So there's a lot of samples to be analyzed now. This is from the cryosphere cluster. It shows a time lapse from a camera that's looking at the marine terminating glacier. Maybe you see a ship rushing back and forth in the fjord. If you look closely, this was an action where we deployed the fiber optic cables in front of the glacier. So it's one of the highlights of this year, I would say. You see now a big calving event. So how the ice is actually shooting out through the entire fjord and all the dynamics that induces. This is not the only thing that the cryosphere cluster is doing. You see, they have a lot of installations. They collected a lot of data, so there will be lots of new results coming forward. And speak to Andreas, he's the expert in the room for that. The ocean cluster also went out with a ship to probe these two different fjords. They used the Greenlandic research vessel, the Sanna, and they had several scientists on board. They did lots of stations. They took more than 1,500 samples, lots of CTD profiles. And here we have some preliminary results. You see on the top graph the temperature profile in the fjord for the ocean terminating glacier, and at the bottom for the land terminating glacier. And so what you can see is that both fjords are actually highly stratified, even the one with the calving, so the ocean terminating one, but you can also see that there is perhaps some more mixing where you see all the blue, so the colder temperatures, and perhaps that can bring more of the nutrients to the surface. But more details to be shown, and Sam is the expert in the room, and also Jerome was on board, so if you have questions, feel free to ask them. Then for the atmosphere cluster, you have seen this image already. We were quite a number of people in the field, and we tried to understand what are the natural and anthropogenic sources of the aerosols that form the clouds. It's important for precipitation, but also for the energy that reaches the Earth's surface. And we have a special focus also on glacial dust. So we married two projects. There is also an EPFL or ENAC flagship project on high latitude dust. And so we're collected filters for chemical analysis. We did real-time observations in this little gray hut with the Green Fjord logo. We had some remote sensing instrumentation, and we did lots of vertical measurements. So here you can see an impression. We did roughly 30 flights. We collected more than 170 filters, more than 20 real-time observation instruments. And so this drone shot shows you a little bit the region where we are based. And so our hub is called NASAC. There is an international research station. And so you can actually see the fjord system that connects both the land terminating and the marine terminating. And just to show you a little bit of data, there were also the Canadian forest fires. So you can actually see a vertical profile of temperature of particles and of absorption of particles. So that's quite important for local heating of the atmosphere. And where I put this red square, you can see that there is elevated concentration and you get higher absorption in the atmosphere. So there will be many, many more data coming forward. And then finally, the biodiversity cluster, they piggyback on all of the expeditions of the other clusters and then take samples together. So we have surface water, bottom water, we have freshwater samples, we have sediment samples, we have ice samples, and we have air samples. And what do they do with it? They do an analysis called environmental DNA. So they sequence these samples to look at microbial, plant, and animal diversity. So this is quite comprehensive, and so we do some outreach so people know about what we're doing. We have a website here. We're loading up content. There is a really nice video that shows you a little bit more of the, let's say, touristic impressions of the fjord systems if you want. So you can scan this or just visit the website. We have a Facebook page because the local communities in Greenland actually communicate via Facebook mainly. And just if you give me 30 seconds, I'll tell a little anecdote. So we communicated with them via a Facebook group and asked them if they wanted to give a name to our balloon. And they were really enthusiastic. And so they suggested more than 100 names. Then we did a little pre-selection, came up with 10 and then had them vote. And in the end, they came up with Naturalik, which means the great white eagle in Greenlandic. So our big balloon is now called Naturalik, the great white eagle, and we'll keep that name. So we found this quite nice, the engagement with the local community. There is the Swiss Polar class, so Anita was with us as well. There is more coming forward in the future. And then actually, since the balloon was extremely visible from far, not local, but the national newspaper of Greenland became interested in our work and they dedicated an entire page. This is the one in Danish. We have another page in Greenlandic, which is actually quite nice to have in the collection of featured newspaper articles. And with that, I'd like to say Kuyanak, also to SPI for funding this and all the other funders that are supporting this. Thanks so much.
Thanks very much. So we move now a little from the polar to the South Pole. So we go a little bit higher in altitude. Of course, in the poles, it's sometimes also very high altitude. So I want to show you a little bit what we did actually this year and talk about, what the team was doing. So you see below the program PIs. So that's Francesca Pelligiotti and myself. And then the cluster PIs is Margit Tchaikovsky, Christina Bixel, Simon Allen, Tom Batten, and the coordinators, Evan Miles and Thomas Sachs. And a special thanks here already at the beginning to Evan. He is really a very, very important key person in our project. So actually what we are doing, so we are looking at the place actually where in the past already when also the Russian scientists were already in this part until the 90s. And then of course they left. But already then in the Pamir, there was not done so much research in the past. And we know, but from the past that actually these glaciers here, for example, if I take the glaciers or in general, the cold regions there, was not so well investigated, but we had there actually, and this is really surprising for some years ago, really stable glaciers, sometimes glaciers which are really advancing. And of course, we wanted to know a little bit more actually about that. So we looked to this region where we have this some sort of Karakorum Pamir anomaly. But this region is also an important region because, for example, water is important there because we have two high mountain countries there where we have the big mountains, so the high mountains up to 7,000 meters there, and they actually collect somehow the snow and release it in form of water later. And we have big rivers there like the Amudarya River actually, which delivers a lot of water into the region where we have the Aral Sea. We all know today that not much water until it goes until the Aral Sea because the water is actually used mainly for agriculture, but also for other regions. And this is really one of the most important areas in the world where water has really a very, very high importance, but we know it also from other regions that we can see on this world map here. So actually we want to see a little bit, can we still see this anomaly or is it also changing now? I will come later to that. And we also want to see there are some impacts on the ecosystem, on the hazards, and also on the water resources in general. And then, of course, we also have one cluster which really looks at the history of the cryospheric research. These people are not on the top of the high mountains, but they are deep in the archives. So if we look now what we are here on this map. So we see this Pamir map actually, and we have here different clusters. The first cluster actually is looking or wants to look actually to the ice core. This is actually one of our clusters who still is somehow a little bit in troubles because we have no helicopters. and without helicopters, this is a big problem to get the ice core. So this is really fundamental there. And the second cluster actually is the permafrost cluster. So we are looking about the changes in permafrost. It's not much done actually until now in the past about permafrost research in the Pamir Mountains. Cluster 3 is looking for snow, glaciers and hydrology. So it's some sort of the very big cluster actually of our flagship. And then the C4 is actually, we already heard this morning from Tom Battin actually what he is doing. So he is also looking to the glaciers, but also to the rivers in front of the glaciers. What happens actually there in the water also for the genetic analysis. And then C5 is the hazard cluster, which looks to the hazard on different hazards, for example, glacier outbursts. And then C6 is actually the cluster, which I already said, which looks to the archives. So we see it, they not only work in the mountains, but they also mainly work in Tashkent, for example, in Dushanbe, and also some parts in Bishkek. And this is actually the cluster which we are very proud on at this moment, because they could really go from a very bad start actually to a highlight actually of our SPI flagship. Because when they started, they wanted to investigate all these Russian information in the archives, for example, in Moscow. And this was, of course, unfortunately, because of the war in Ukraine, was completely deleted. So actually, they have to think how we can really do now our cluster. And actually, they went now to the individual countries, for example, in Tashkent, in Uzbekistan, or also they went to Dushanbe in these archives and also in Bishkek. And they were very, very successful. They got really good results. And I think this is really a very, very promising result that they look now really in the history of glacier science from the past. Then also we had very good information related to cluster 3 from snow, glaciers and hydrology, where we have very good measurements, particularly this year actually. We could do some GPR radar surveys actually on several glaciers. So we increased that actually from 2 stations where we had until now to about now 6. So we have much more information now also on the bed topography of some of our glaciers which we are investigating. And then, of course, we also had some highlights in the permafrost cluster where we could do some very nice profiles on very different surfaces actually. So sometimes they are really completely different what we can observe, for example, in comparison to the Swiss Alps, because we have very high altitudes, very dry environments there. And we could see there, for example, here you see one of the image here shows a rock glacier and vegetation sediments in front of it. And then, of course, what is also important that we have a very good support of the images actually from satellites. So we have Pleiades images. We have now several points where we have collected these images, and these images help us particularly for snow research, for example, but also for glacier mass balance. We can use it also for ground temperatures and hydrology. And this is really important that we also have this support of very good support for this from these satellites. But we have also many other highlights, I think. You can read it here. So we have good workshops and trainings. Actually, we have also the support that we take local researchers actually from Tajikistan to Switzerland and make with them some trainings here also in Switzerland. Then we have also the first time now that cluster 4 was now in the field, so they could do some genetic samples of mountain fluvial ecosystems in Tajikistan. Then we have many points of cluster 5 now, lake surveys, landscape assessments, establishments of hazard monitoring sites. Maybe we also have now access to Soviet aerial surveys, because we have to know already in the past they did very good surveys also in the years 50s or even 60s. they had these aerial surveys. And then, of course, also the rest here, I don't go now in all the details because also of the time. But we have to ask now something which is important for us because we thought, okay, maybe we see here some sort of stable conditions. But now I think if we look now in the time and during the past, we saw now that we see a development actually there, that also the region which was before some sort of stable or even positive, maybe also start to change. And if we really look closer, what we see in the last year, it's maybe what before in the talk actually also we saw from Antarctica. We suddenly see now a big change there. We see strong warming effects also in our regions. And of course, also sometimes decreasing precipitation. And you can imagine for glaciers, of course, this is probably the most worst scenario, higher temperature and no snow. So that's not a good thing for the future for them. And we also can observe actually that we see that even if you are there in the field, you can recognize it. Each year, actually, the surface of the glaciers, for example, gets darker and darker. So the albedo actually really is going down, and we can see that also related in the figure here very clearly. So where are we going? I think it's really on urgency because I think it changes fast there also in the Pamir. We need these observations, and I think this is really one of the aims also of this project, to create data, that we have some data actually also for the future. I think this is very important, and this helps us actually to better understand what are the processes there. And finally, of course, this should also maybe help for the society, that we maybe can plan also better what it means. For example, finally, for the runoff of water, also for the future. And therefore, I think it's very important that we look into this system really to better describe actually what is happening. And we see there is really something happening also at this site in Central Asia. And yes, thanks very much for listening. And yeah, if you have questions, thanks.
So, hello everyone. Thank you for your invitation. I present the study on behalf of my research group. The topic is cardiac arrhythmia in climbers on Mount Everest. Sudden cardiac death accounts for approximately 1/3 of all deaths in mountain years. Physiological responses to high altitude increase the vulnerability for different patterns of cardiac arrhythmias. As an example, sleep deprivation, decreased partial pressure of oxygen, dehydration, electrolyte imbalances, and an excessive adrenergic drive contribute to an arrhythmogenic milieu at high altitude. We therefore aimed to explore the incidence of cardiac arrhythmias in healthy subjects climbing Mount Everest. Participants underwent transthoracic echocardiography, exercise stress testing, and continuous rhythm monitoring at baseline, as well as continuous rhythm monitoring during the expedition. Between January and May 2023, we recruited a total of 41 participants with a mean age of 34 years. After exclusion of 7 participants due to missing rhythm recording during the climb, 34 healthy participants remained for the analysis. At baseline, transthoracic echocardiography showed no wall motion abnormalities. Exercise stress testing yielded no findings suspicious of ischemia, and the rhythm monitoring showed no cardiac arrhythmias at baseline in any of the participants. On the left side, you can see a bar graph of individual participants indicating maximum altitude reached. In light blue, the climb with use of supplemental oxygen. 32 participants reached an altitude of at least 7,900 meters, and 40 of them reached the summit of the Mount Everest. During the expedition, approximately 50 endpoint relevant events were recorded. More than 1 out of 3 healthy climbers on Mount Everest experienced cardiac arrhythmia. However, all the arrhythmia episodes were asymptomatic. Thank you for your attention.
So hi everyone. Today I want to tell you about what we are doing at PSI regarding ice core analysis. Imagine to walk through a meadow with a metal detector, and what you will see will be some metal pieces, maybe the keys that we have lost the day before. But what we will not see will be some microorganisms that live in the meadow itself, or some pieces of plastic, or some pieces of glass. This doesn't mean that these things, these entities do not exist. They exist, but we are not able to see them because we are limited by the tools that we are using to explore what's around us. This applies also when it comes to ice core studies. Ice cores are unique environmental archives that allow us to understand and to reconstruct the past atmospheric aerosol composition over the last hundreds of thousands of years. And so far, our understanding has been limited by the analytical tools that we have used. Indeed, the majority of the investigations were focused on the inorganic component of the aerosol, while up to 75 or even more % of the total aerosol mass is constituted by organic molecules. There are some studies on ice cores that targeted these organic molecules, but they are limited on just a few classes, for example, biomass burning tracers or persistent organic pollutants. This means that we are actually overlooking the majority of the organic molecules that are present in our sample. To overcome this knowledge gap, we take advantage of the advances in high-resolution mass spectrometry and on the development of the so-called non-target screening workflows that, when applied to environmental samples, allow us to detect thousands of different compounds, not just a few dozens. And at PSI, we developed a method, a non-target screening method that was applied on ice cores. And here you can see a snapshot from a sample collected at the Beluga, so in the Siberian Altai, where each dot corresponds to a specific molecule. The color refers to the molecular composition. So, for example, green refers to molecules that are constituted by carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Violet to compounds that have also nitrogen in the structure, and so on. And we were able to detect more than 400 different compounds. And when we take all together the samples, so here, for example, is a record always from the Beluga ice core that covers the period 1830-1980, we are able to provide a unique and more comprehensive reconstruction of the past atmospheric aerosol composition. As you can see, the majority of the compounds is constituted by carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, so the green colors. But then around the mid-50s, we observe an increase in some compounds with nitrogen in the structure and also sulfur in their structure, which is a clue of a change in the molecular composition of the ice core due to environmental pollution. What we also saw from this analysis is that the compounds also have an increase and a higher oxidation state, which suggests, but we are still understanding, which we are still studying this, that there might be an increase also in the atmospheric oxidative capacity. So to conclude, we are just at the beginning of this new scientific journey, I would say, that exploit non-target screening analysis on ice cores. And the potentialities are a lot. For example, we might be able to find or to discover new proxies that can be useful for future paleoclimate reconstructions, and coupled with other investigation on other regions of the world, we can increase our understanding on how the atmospheric aerosol has changed over the last hundreds of years. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And thanks to the Polar Institute's Polar Access Fund, I was able to join a field trip to Western Greenland this year. I joined the Kugeli team from the University of Zurich, where we had a multidisciplinary fieldwork with many geophysical methods. So we have the main goal of the project is to study the short-term ice stream dynamics of the Zermatt-Puyallup in Gandia, which is just south of Ilulissat in the so-called ice fjord. And there we had actually a base camp which was close to the Kelvin front. And you see it on a picture on the right, where we had a spectacular theater to watch actually the fastest moving glacier of the world, because you see it real time, because there is huge calving events going on, because it's moving 20 to 30 meters per day, these outlet glacier. So more about the fieldwork. We had the base camp, and from there we had a radar setup. And in the bottom, you see two pictures from the radar made by Martin Lutti, where you see clearly the calving front and the change in the calving front over the time you were there. In between, we don't have data because it was foggy and some technical issues. We also had Antoine with us in the team, and with a thermal camera, he could observe and measure the temperature of the calving icebergs. And this is all to be further studied and papers written about, so more results to come. But what my main goal was to join the team was, as a seismologist, we put seismic sensors on the ice, which is normally used for earthquake measurements, but now gaining popularity in the cryospheric sciences. So you put a seismometer on the ice, as indicated in the map. They are 30 kilometers upstream from the base camp, measuring there 2.5 weeks, all kind of vibrations. And we had to drill a hole in the ice where we could lower the sensor in, and those were connected to the box, also shown in the middle image. And then they were recording the vibrations. And why do we use this seismic data for? And what can we measure? Well, that is summarized in the cartoon I made. In red, you see all kind of processes on the glacier and the surroundings that generate these tremors and vibrations that we measure with the seismic sensors. And you see a cartoon, or you see the wiggle, that is actually a seismic signal you measure. But based on these signals in time over different frequency bands, and with variation in amplitude, we can do a lot of analysis methods in order to get ideas about the subglacial conditions, which is the project topic of my postdoc research. And that is indicated in the cartoon in blue, for example, to get the ice thickness, layering in the ice, velocity of the ice, bedrock conditions. So that is actually the aim of the project. And for that, I was really happy that I could go on this field trip and join the team with the funding, because I worked on the data from last year as well already, but now witnessing the glacier, seeing the real-time dynamics and processes definitely gives you a different view on your data, and I think would definitely help to do further interpretations. Thank you.
Okay. We both graduated from ETH last year, and I'm now pursuing a PhD at the University of Zurich. And
yeah, my background is environmental science at ETH, and I'm also an outdoor developer.
Together we have now the opportunity to give you a short recap what we experienced on this amazing field trip. And we also thank, of course, the SBI for financial support for this.
Okay, so if you look at the map on the screen, you can see the Juneau ice field. It's in Alaska at the border to Canada. And in yellow, you can see the past. So what we did during our 7-week expedition on the ice, we crossed the Juneau ice field from Juneau in like the southern part of the Juneau ice field all the way up to the north of the Juneau ice field to Edwin in Canada. And along the way, we did a lot of research together with researchers from all around the world. And we learned a lot about earth and climate science, as well as like wilderness medicine, how to cross the glacier, how to like glacier safety, rescue, and all that kind of stuff.
Of course, in a 7-week field trip, you need some housing. One picture you see on the lower left side is one of the major camps. These are built in the 40s to the 70s out of wood and corrugated metal. And but we did not only limit ourselves to these major camps. We also had some satellite camps to do some further research in some even more remote regions. What you see in the middle on the left is one picture. Maybe you can recall this. This is the title picture of the annual report of the SPI of last year.
Okay, and now if you look on the pictures on the right side in the screen, you can see impressions of the research we did along the way. In the corner, the lowest picture on the right is us doing mass balance pits. So we basically dig 6-meter deep holes in snow. Yes, we had a lot of snow that year. And then we had to rappel down and take like snow samples to measure the snow density. And this we did on several places all over the ice field, and that gave us a good impression on how the health of the ice field is. And we have data records of this since 1948, so really long. It's the second longest data set all over the world. So I think it's really cool to contribute to this measurement. Then in the middle, you can see other pictures from another kind of science we did. It's interferometry. With this, you see the interferometer on the picture. So we measured the speed of the glacier, how fast the glacier flows, and then we use this data for models afterwards. And then in the top right corner, you see a picture of snow and shallow ice coring. So we also took several core samples along the way. This was actually one of my nature science projects during this summer. And we then analyzed the water isotope data and connected it, or like first we reconstructed the temperatures over the last few years on the ice field. And then we connected it to storm data to find out about the moisture origin, the location of the moisture of the snow falling on the ice field. And it's pretty cool to see, for example, in very cold years, we could see a change of pattern. So the snow came from like North Russia, and in other years, for example, more from Canada. And this is just a short overview. Of course, we did a lot of other science as well. We had a lot of temperature sensors that we put all over the ice field. Yeah.
Last but not least, such a field trip in this high cryosphere region in Alaska means also that you need a lot of travel. And on the top left, you see one picture. We traveled by skis or by foot over the ice. On the top left, you see the picture where we had the skis strapped to our backpacks and walking over one of the heavily crevassed regions. Here in this place, going off the ice field on the Canadian side.
Yeah, so during this expedition, we didn't only learn a lot about science and how to do science on these remote snowy areas. We also built a lot of strong friendships that are still lasting now. And we had a really good opportunity to do networking with people from all around the world that we still get in touch today. So if you also are interested to hear more about science and science results in the Juno ice field, or you just want to hear some stories about bears in camps or how it is to live 7 weeks without a phone on the ice field, or you might be interested as well to join yourself such an expedition, because this is actually held once a year every summer. It can be either a student, staff, or academic researcher who will come to us and talk to us about it. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. So let me take you to the eastern part of the Himalaya where we conducted dendrochronological fieldwork with the funding from SPI, Polar Access Fund. Thank you so much for the funding. You might be wondering what dendrochronologists do in terms of polar research related context, where you have snow and glaciers, blanket of snow and glaciers all around without any trees. So for that, let me take you to the eastern part of the Himalaya, a place called Sikkim, which is surrounded by several international borders, China at the top, Bhutan in the west, Nepal in the east, and the Zemu Glacier. That glacier has, this is the second largest glaciers in the Himalayas, and the largest in the eastern part of the Himalaya, where we consider two sub-catchments, the upper Tista catchments, which is UT here, and the LC is called the Lachung catchments. Chu is the river in the Sikkimese language, where we conducted our dendrochronological fieldwork to collect samples from tree rings to basically reconstruct the hydrology, the stream flows in this system. And we reconstructed around 180 to 200 years of discharge data, pre-monsoon discharge, particularly in May, and also tried to identify some of the disturbances in the tree growth due to some natural hazards like earthquakes. So what I want to focus here in this presentation, particularly the challenges, and you must be agree with me that every fieldwork, whether it's in the polar regions or in the Himalayan context, involves a lot of challenges and risk. And in terms of our study, we also had several field risk, conducting the field work, and you can see some of the photographs. And I was lucky to have some of the really knowledgeable local guide who actually know the local context more than we know from our literatures or from books. For example, here you can see in the first image, we had to cross rivers several times, like across the rivers to go to the field to collect our data, and there was no other means to cross, like bridges or anything, except crossing over. And also we have several spots where we identified kind of zones where very prone to rock falls. These rocks and materials are very loose, they fall anytime. And this photo I attach here just to highlight that this local guide who at some point stopped and told me to stop behind because he somehow identified that some rocks were falling down. And the third photo here, when on the way to the first site, we saw this valley was completely green without any such kind of scenario. And then on our way back, we saw this chunk of ice and debris slided through and moved downstream for several hundred meters. So this sort of risk always involved because this study site is very unstable. And after overcoming all those challenges, when we reached to the site, we caught trees at the floodplains next to the river and at also higher elevation, ideally the older trees, to build our chronology as long as possible. And then after several treatment, when I say treatment, statistical measurements and preparing the samples, we developed this time series or tree ring chronology. If you don't know what the tree ring chronology means, the principle is that tree grows every year, and the width of the ring depends on what's the climatic conditions of that particular year, hydroclimatic conditions. And if you look at the ring here, for example, we have a clear pattern of changes in terms of ring formation. Some are very narrow, some are wide. That shows us the climatic conditions. And not only the climatic conditions, but also natural hazards influence the growth. For example, I highlighted 2 years, particularly in 2015 and 2011, when we have the record that this area, including Nepal, have experienced a devastating earthquake. Epicenter was in Kathmandu. And we have seen the impact of those natural hazards in our ring formation. And a photo of a damaged building destroyed by a recent landslide a couple of years ago. And we are really interested not just to reconstruct the hydrology, but also to reconstruct those sort of natural hazards if possible. So with that, thank you very much for your funding. And I have a blog about the fieldwork at SPI website with this QR code. And if you are interested to discuss about more, I would be very happy to chat with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here. Also, particularly, I work a bit in the Swiss Polar Institute a few years ago, so very happy to be back. So I'm a geologist, as a few in the room, I believe. I just wanted to start to introduce this sense of time for geologists, which is sometimes a bit weird when I talk with friends. So, for example, if the Earth were condensed, the history of the Earth were condensed in 24 hours, humanity as we know it, it will appear only 2 minutes before the Big Bang. So now I will try to take you a bit to our project, which is in the Cenozoic, which is 60 million years ago. And we geologists, this is a good cartoon that represents us. We just go to the field. We like to collect materials. In my case, for rocks, we always work with water or ice or gas in some cases. And the motivation of our project is to try to help to determine the age of when the ice cap of Antarctica was formed. So the paradigm goes like this. We have an Antarctica full of rainforest 60 million years ago. As I was saying, this is quite recent for us, for geologists. But then the problem with this is that the position of Antarctica, it was relatively close to the pole as it is now, which means that we need to try to understand why Antarctica froze, even though it was relatively in a polar position. As I was saying, this occurred 60 million years ago, slowly. And then for that, it was proposed that Antarctica was actually isolated first in the sea figure. It's not what relation, but in the sea figure, as you can see, Antarctica was slowly separated from the other continent mass, first from Tasmania and Australia, and then from South America and Patagonia. And this caused an oscillation, which we today know is known as the Antarctic Polar Current. And this is an oscillation that lately produced and allow to the ice to develop and form as we know it. But then people started to crunch these numbers and didn't work so well, especially because we don't know very well when this occurred. And then it was observed that the CO2 in the atmosphere dropped constantly during the Cenozoic. And this was the explanation to say why Antarctica developed such a big cup of ice. And for that, time matters for all these models, and especially when we want to test how these models work. So our project is trying to understand and try to help with this. I don't know if you can see, but this is an outflow from King George Island. It's a little bit like a pancake tower, and each one of these is a different kind of rock. There is a particular one that I want to point out, but which is like this. This one is a very specific type of rock that records the formation of the ice cap. So what we want to do is to go there and sample, but as you can see, it's quite tricky. It's a 200 meters cliff. So then we went with some specialists, and we did a line, and then we were able to sample. So what do we want to do is to basically take a piece of rock that we have also other people working with us, working in microfossils, so also magnetic studies. And we want to find this mineral, which is a zircon. And zircons are today probably the most precise tool to understand the time encompassing one material. So while we go to the field, we collect a rock, and then we seek for these minerals, and then we analyze it in our lab. And with that, we obtain a number. Particularly, we use TIMS technology, which is the more precise and
and also providing the less uncertainties. So with this, hopefully, we will be able to help to understand when Antarctica was actually frozen, and as I was saying before, to understand a bit better how this process all occurred. Thank you.
Hello everyone. I'm going to try to be very dynamic because I think we all need 3 glasses of wine. My presentation is a kind of the far opposite of everything that's been said today, just because my my study is film history, but in the case today, I'm talking to you as a producer at Nuprod in Lausanne. We're a production company that mobilizes and inspires for a more sustainable and resilient world. And I'll read the little paragraph that my impact team wrote for me. With and for our partners, we develop concepts and create high impact editorial content for the general public. We're convinced that audiovisual content allows us to address societal issues in depth, such as sustainability, culture, health, etc. And we approach these themes in a scientific and journalistic way in order to put them back at the center of concerns and thus have an impact, a positive impact on society. And today I'm here to talk to you briefly about our project Consequence with the little 2 for the CO2. Get it? Consequence? No? Okay. So reduction of CO2 emissions is a central issue of our time. We all know that. The reduction of a part of these emissions requires individual actions that are still difficult to initiate or encourage today. And so since the company was founded in 2017, we produced a lot of high quality content for RTS or SRF. And we realized that the best way to reach a wider audience was through the web. And I'll tell you about that a bit later. With that in mind, for the project Consequence, we hired YouTubers and made them work with Swiss scientists and or researchers specialized in sustainability in order to show and or explain both the impact of some of our daily gestures, but also some solutions helping to reduce our carbon impact. And this project also finances a postdoctorate in social psychology at Université de Genève, that is with the professor Tobias Brosch. And the aim is to find ways to better communicate about the reduction of the planet's carbon footprint in order to impact and change people's behavior. There's been a lot of work about changing people's perception, but not a lot of work to change people's behavior. So we turn to YouTube for one simple reason, to reach a wider audience, and the audience that doesn't watch television anymore. And we had the impression, rightly so, that on RTS, for example, we were only talking to people that are already convinced. And this is when RTS accepted our content because, you know, they're used to refusing shows about sustainability because, you know, since they broadcasted a documentary on that subject 2 years ago, they think that their job is done and they don't have to say anything more about that. So that's just my personal comment. So for our first season, which went from October 2021 to July 2022, we produced 6 videos, all posted on the Talents YouTube page that together accumulated more than 2.2 million views collectively. And so we're able to reach that many people, which on RTS or SRF is impossible. To give you an idea, Poisson Fécond, who's there, it's a very unusual name, but he's there. He reached more than 780,000 viewers, and Denise over here at the bottom reached over, it changed. When I did the slide, it was 655,000, and now she's over 670,000 views, which is 3 to 4 times the rating for a show in prime time on RTS. So it's incredible. So for the first season, we went with those 6, and we had them work. For example, Thomas Wiesel worked with Professor François Maréchal. Enjoy Phoenix worked with Oriane Sarrazin from Université de Lausanne. Jojol worked with Roman Sachi from the Paul Scher Institute. Noah worked with Gabriel Salerno from Université de Lausanne. Poisson Fécond worked with Dr. Nathalie Chèvre from Université de Lausanne. And Denise worked with the people from My Climate. So we covered subject from link between pollution and climate change, comparing planes to long-distance trains, heating a city with CO2, eco-anxiety, electric car versus thermal cars, and the collapse of society if we don't do anything. with those numbers in mind, we decided to greenlit season 2, which will start this fall with a brand new website online today. So if there's little bugs, we're sorry about that, but it got released today, and 6 influencers. So we're going back with Poisson Fécond and Denise because there are 2 stars from season 1, but also Le Grand JD, which is the most successful Swiss YouTuber, as well as 2 other people called Le Roi des Rats and Luan. I also have another YouTuber with whom I'm in discussion with, but I can't tell you before he signs the contract because I don't want to talk about it before that, but he has over 5 million followers, which would be very great for the project. So if I'm here today, it's not to brag about this project, but more because we're still in pre-production for season 2, which will spread between November 2023 and August 2024. And we're always looking for new subjects, relationships, opportunities, financial partners, because it's always about money. We might have JD talk about the glaciers in Switzerland, specifically here in Valais. But after meeting Danielle at an event in the past June, I had a glimpse of hope, thinking that we could actually go film in the Arctic for this project, or even a special documentary for 2025. That is, if I'm not mistaken, Ewan's year of the glacier. So we want to maybe do something like that and convince or force RTS or SRF to, talk about that. So the project is financed in part by Seedling Foundation, Canton de Vaud, us, Nous Prod, as well as Université de Genève when it comes to publishing the postdoctorate's finding, which should come at the end of the year or early next year. Thank you.
Thank you. Perfect. I just want to talk quickly about the last sampling I've done on the East Greenlandic coast, and that was like a third-party funded cruise. I was on board with Anna from EPFL and Dave from AIWAC that are in this room. And basically 8 scientists were on board. We all had different interests, but along the way, we found some common ground. My main goal was to sample methane that was coming out of glaciers. So I was sampling in the water column. The idea was to get close to glacier, but also a bit offshore to kind of see where this methane would get distributed. Do we keep it? Is it being used, etc., etc. So I wasn't able to reach all of the sites I wanted, but I was really happy to be able to reach some sites that were sampled in 2019 by a group from the University of Kiel. And I think if any of you are planning to go close to this fjord or close to this point in the coming years, it would be really interesting to give you these little bottles for you to sample some dissolved methane to kind of start a time series on the East Greenland coast, in particular because glaciers are melting really fast on that side and it's a bit understudied. You can see that there is a point around Narsarsuaq, and that was because I could at the same time meet people from Greenfjord and help with sampling over there, which was really great. And hopefully talk a bit more about their finding in this fjord in comparison with the few data points I could get on the East Greenlandic coast. In particular, what was really great is that thanks to this cruise, I could start collaboration with the Greenlandic Institute for Natural Resource and maybe able to join on their cruise later on because they go every year in some of these fjords. So it's really nice, opportunity to join them on. So if you go to the East Greenland coast, please let me know and I can give you a bottle or we can talk about how you can just add these samples to your data set. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll be very brief and I want to say 3 things. First of all, I want to say thank you to all of you for sticking around. Sorry for being a little bit late. I hope you enjoyed it. We did very much. Then I want to say thank you also to the team at SPI. They worked really hard. I want a special hand for Laurence and Anita and Yelena, who really did an amazing job today. So well done. And thank you for the EPFL team here who put up with us moving chairs and It's putting the place a bit upside down. So that's my thank you part. The next part is please don't run away. We'll take a photo with a banner before we start drinking. Oh yeah. And then I have another point that I've just been told to add, which is that for all the open forum speakers, they should pass by the front here, and there's a little something from them, from all of us. And with that, I would like to pass the floor to the vice chair of our Science and Technology Advisory Committee, Björn, who will say the closing words.
And it says 5-minute conclusion. Conclusion, no. 2 minutes, no, 1 minute. To conclude a fantastic day like this, in my book, is impossible, more than saying it is a fantastic day. But it's much easier to look forward. So now we have networking, hard networking. But I will maybe, to support the networking, I will present my personal keywords that might support you when you work hard. But you only work hard if you take a drink, or the other way around. I don't know. Well, anyhow, couple of keywords to bring with us when we network. Teamwork. And the second one, most important, the elephant in the room. River sediments, Svalbard plants, artificial life, drones, sea ice microbes, apex, water that never freezes, development of a canton, extreme professors, or what is it the other way around? I can't remember. Japanese opportunities, Canadian opportunities, calls are open. Remember that. The children, RV workshop, possible new flagships initiative, less carbon footprint, earth goodness. I really like that. Albedo, thermal conductivity, great white eagle, hearts that bumps. 7 weeks without a phone. And I whisper, Roberta's whispered to me, that's holiday. Consequences, YouTube. Couple of keywords that I wrote. And the last thing, a very personal thing from me, is the following reflection. Why are we doing this? And why don't talk about that? And not in the usual word when we send in an application. We do this because sustainable development, blah, blah, blah. We need to fill in the gap, blah, blah, blah. But on a deeper personal level, why are we so passionate about polar and high altitude research? I think that's might be a good theme for discussion. So now, that's all.